Hello and welcome to Money, Me and COVID-19, where we meet with leaders from the worlds of business, property and finance to get their take on what's happening in this pandemic and how we can best prepare ourselves to survive it and then hopefully to prosper afterwards. My guest today is in a unique position of having a heavy-duty kind of property background and also having become a media celebrity in more recent years. He's a chartered surveyor who held senior positions at firms like DTZ, BNP Paribas, and Morgan Stanley. And then he appeared on the very first series of The Apprentice, and that brought him to sort of national prominence. And since then, he's developed a media career on business and current affairs with organizations like the BBC, Sky News, LBC, and more recently now with Talk Radio. He also writes the very much admired and much read column in the Financial Times about rich people's problems. He is, of course, James Max. James, welcome back to Money and Me.
Thank you very much indeed. Nice to be here.
Of course, normally, James, with a pre-breakfast show on Talk Radio, you'd be in your London home and up early to get to the studio. Now you're in lockdown at your home in the lovely resort of Frinton-on-Sea. So I guess life has changed somewhat for you recently.
Yeah, here's the best thing, right? So I can broadcast from my home, and all the time that I spent traveling to the studio, so say half an hour in the morning and half an hour back home on the tube, I don't have to do, so that's an hour I've saved. Any time I might spend traveling between London or being elsewhere, that's time saved. So I've calculated that I have between 14 and 17 extra hours a week that I'm not traveling around doing stuff, and it has been marvelous. So well done the home working, well done the technology that allows us to do that, and well done the view. I mean, I always thought that my view from the 14th and now 17th floor of the News UK building as we look out from our studios was pretty epic as you look across London. My view here, which I can't show you, but it's across my neighbour's garden. It goes across a links golf course, if you like golf. I don't particularly, I think it's a good walk ruin, but anyway, it's nice to look at. And then it goes up to the seawall, and then I can see the sea, which today is quite flat and quite blue, and quite marvellous. And what a view to have.
Fantastic. So does this mean you're going to give up your London home and do all future broadcasts from Frinton-on-Sea?
I'm not sure that's going to be allowed. I think what this does, though, like many of us, I think, is it alerts us to the fact that home working is not an impossibility. Home working is something that can be very productive, and home working allows you to have a very slightly different relationship, time and effort, if you like, with what you do. So will we see people change how they operate? I think we will. So for example, if I were to do a new contract with Talk Radio, fingers crossed I will, I would like to be able to say to them, during the summer months, I'd like to have a few weeks where I'm based somewhere else. I still do my show, but to have that opportunity to be able to have that sort of, relationship with this house where all my friends are, family up the road, that sort of thing, I think is really something I've truly valued as a result of the pandemic and the constraints that we all have. And also I love gardening and, being able to do that as well. So I think, I don't know about everybody else, but I'm sure that our relationship, if you like, with our lives and our working lives has probably changed, and it will have had impact forever. Would it change completely? No, of course not. There are many aspects that we will look forward to returning, but I think some aspects will change forever.
I think obviously turning to the more kind of serious implications of this, the media generally has tended to focus on the health impact of COVID-19, but there's also going to be a massive economic impact. I mean, from both your own point of view and perhaps some of the people you're talking to on your program, how do you see the impact of this and what lies ahead for us?
Well, you take 2 or 3 months production out of an economy and you multiply that across the world, it's going to be significant. Also, I think the whole sort of V-shaped recovery is, again, a misnomer. And I think we've learned our lesson about predicting into the future, because we, I think as a society, rather spent too much time, I think, in the last decade saying this person is an expert, and their analysis of the past then allows them to have some strange kind of soothsayer ability to be able to say what's going to happen in the future. I think what we can do is we can apply what we know from the past and how we as a nation have recovered from deep recessions, to see how this might pan out going forward. But I think if anybody thinks that, first of all, everything is going to be the same, it isn't. So people will do things differently. And even, for example, if you were allowed to go on holiday tomorrow, would everybody choose to go? No, they won't. Will everybody choose to have a holiday where you have to socially distance? Again, no, they won't. They'll say, you know what, I'll leave it for a little while. You only need 10, 15, 20% of people to make those decisions, and your economy has shifted. So I think it's really important that as we start to look at how the impact is, it's not just that we've lost X number of weeks or months of production. It's also impacted different people in different ways. Some people, they've gone from 100% to zero in terms of turnover. Some people have seen their turnover go up a bit. I mean, we've got local businesses, food businesses that are doing tremendously well. We've got others, which are food businesses and local businesses, that are not doing so well because they're trying to help people. So they're cutting their sales prices, but they've still got the volume going through, but they've got different staff costs and delivery costs, all sorts of things going on. And then, of course, we've got the unpredictable, which is the human psyche. And the human psyche might say, well, you know what, I don't want to do that. Or I'm going to be a little bit more cautious about how much money I've got in the bank because I've used all my reserves, or, you know, I just want to spend a bit more differently, or I've really enjoyed having this amount of time and I'm not going to work so hard. So if we're trying to plot what this looks like, I think there will be a recovery for sure. I think the fundamentals that have been damaged or were damaged so very badly after the financial crash back in 2008 are very different now. I think some things return to normal. I think we've all learned that we hate the word or the term new normal, because, I mean, if you know anybody and they say, well, I'm normal, someone says not normal. The only normal people are people you don't know very well. And on that basis, that the only normal is what you knew before. And I think the whole point about this is a lot of what we do as human beings will stay. We like to socialize. We like to see people. We like to play sport. We like to go places. We like to do things. But I think a lot of people's decisions will have been changed by this, and they will want to do things in a different way when it comes to the other side. So that means when you're plotting recovery, yes, it will recover, but it will not go back to where it was. It will go to a new level, and some businesses will go back to levels that we haven't seen before and higher levels. Some will suffer irreparable damage.
Absolutely, and I think it also changes the way companies are thinking. On the day we're recording this, Facebook have just announced that 50% of their UK staff will be permanently working from home and will lose things like London waiting allowances. Now, I mean, you've been an advisor to some of the biggest projects in London. What do you think this might mean in terms of, let's say, the commercial sector, office buildings and so on going forward? Are we going to see a collapse in demand for these big head offices that seem to have, you know, no further purpose?
Well, the thing is that I don't take the view that there's no further purpose for them. I take the view that the purpose for them is going to be very different. So I think one of the things that's going to determine what this looks like is going to be driven by how long the pandemic sits with us. So if it's a year and then it goes and then we get back to being able to socialize in the way we were before, then I think there will be one set of changes that take place in the workplace. So, for example, we will see more agile working. At the moment, it's not acceptable to have hot desking, so therefore you have to have desks which are cleaned and cleared and sorted, and it's a whole nightmare. If you're able to have hot desking again, and you've got people going in for, say, 3 days in a week as opposed to 4 or 5, I think that will change the dynamic of space. Will people want to have their own offices or their own space? No, you book an office or book a desk for when you want it. I think shared space more important. Meeting rooms more important. Things that happen in the office, groups and meetings and discussions and all that sort of stuff more important. I think you come in at 9 o'clock and you do your work and then you go home at 5, less important. So, I think we're going to see a much more sort of hub play. We're going to be seeing how people interact with each other. And it also depends what you do. If you make something or do something, and you design something, or I think that's going to be very different to the way people who interact who trade what can only be described as bullshit, i.e. advice. So, if you're in an advisory business, then, you can be anywhere, it doesn't matter. So I think we're going to, in the same way that when you have a look at historic pictures and you go back in time and you see that there was a time when it was mostly blokes and they mostly wore bowler hats. And then suddenly, as if overnight, those bowler hats just disappeared. And within 2 or 3 years, they had all gone. This is going to be the new normal and the new change. We're used to seeing people in a work environment where they're not wearing a tie. And whenever I see people who are in ties and jackets, I just think, we're used to not seeing you look like that. And it's a bit weird. And I think that kind of formality is going to change. There are some people who persist in doing it, but I think it's because they have no imagination. But mostly, that kind of formality goes. I also think the way people use the office is going to change because we as individuals are going to demand that change. Because in the past, you used to say, as a manager, I don't really want people working from home that much because it just means that they're watching telly and bunking off. We now know that, in fact, you have a lot of people who go into an office, they look like they're working hard, but they produce very little. And let's stop with the people who put the jacket on the back of the chair and spend their whole time swanning around and, they're out for coffees and lunch and blah, blah, blah. And, there's a lot of yada, yada. And I remember when I worked for an American investment bank, there were some people who made out that they worked ever so hard. And actually, they were just frightfully inefficient. And what we want, I think, from this is efficiency. If you've done your job, if you're doing your job, I don't care where you do it. However, there will be times that I want you there. And I think that we will see managers saying, there are times that I want you there, but I think there will be managers who will say, if you want to go and pick up your kids and walk the dog and do whatever you want to do, please go ahead and do it. This is the time of the group meeting. This is the time when we get together, and I don't care if you're in person or if you Zoom in. Whatever you do, this is when you are there. This is when you join us. This is when we decide what we're going to do, and we dole out the stuff. How you then do it is up to you.
Well, I think that's interesting, because if we follow that kind of logic through, and a lot of the people watching us own, property portfolios and are very interested in where residential property prices are going as a result of all this, might we then say, well, actually, I'd rather move further out of, say, the big city and live in the country if I'm only going to come into the office 1 day a week, and might that have a structural impact on the residential market?
Absolutely. I've just written an article for a publication that I do quite a lot of stuff for, which is Spectator Life, which is just about that. And I think that for certain people, I'm sure that having 2 or more homes is what people want to do. I think there are certain kinds of property that they will want to have. So say, for example, if you have the sort of job that may allow you to do 3 days a week in the office and 2 days a week somewhere else, would you mind having an extra commute? So in fact, what you're dealing with is you're dealing with somebody who might say, I'll go into the office on Tuesday and I'll have that long commute on Tuesday morning. Tuesday night, I stay wherever I am, in my little, rabbit hutch, or maybe even a small hotel or whatever it may be, or club membership. And maybe I do that Wednesday night. And then Thursday night, I go home, I do the long commute again. Might even be Wednesday night that people do it. It all depends on what you do. Because very often, if you're writing a report or doing something, you don't need and don't want to have all the distractions. I think it will improve productivity if it's managed effectively. And so what that means, I think, is it doesn't mean a collapse in any shape or form of the central city location. I think there are a lot of people for whom that's very convenient. If you've got children at schools and all that sort of stuff, and the urban lifestyle will still be very attractive. I think the urban partial lifestyle will also be very productive for people who want to be there a few days a week. Where it changes, I think, is the person who needs or wants a bigger place and then doesn't want to have a second home or all that sort of stuff, and likes that urban lifestyle. I think that urban thing that we've had for the last 30 years, urban, having all these takeaways and things down the road, and all this convenient stuff, I think to an extent that goes, in terms of being super fashionable, trendy. You have a look at prices and say, for example, you say £650,000. I think that's sort of the tipping point. It's quite a lot of money. To a Londoner, that gets you, if you're lucky, a 2-bed flat. In the suburbs, it gets you maybe, a sort of smallish house or something. There are certain places you can buy something to live in for that amount of money. You take £650,000 out of London, but within 2 hours travel, west particularly, north to an extent, east to an extent, not south. Weirdly, south, very expensive. What you can buy for that money is absolutely astonishing. You can get thatched houses with 3, 4, 5 bedrooms. You can get places which have 1, 2, 3 acres of land. You can get a little village which has maybe a pub and a small shop and a thing. We know that as long as you've got really good internet and broadband, and if you're less than 2 hours away, that suddenly opens up a very big swathe of the country that is vastly affordable. And for the people who have been upset, if you like, because they can't get the lifestyle they want, I think if you've got the money, why wouldn't you have a nice big central London house and your bolt hole in the country? You'll continue to do that. You might put more emphasis on your bolt hole. But I think for the person for whom that has not really been attainable or affordable, suddenly this becomes an option. And then you can buy a really small, almost horror of a flat in a godforsaken location. Because that you really are using that as a dormitory for 1 or 2 nights, and it completely changes the balance as to where you live and what you do and where you socialise.
So a lot of the people watching us are in what you could call, I suppose, Britain's favourite investment of the last 30 years, which is residential buy-to-let. They've already had what you could almost call a vendetta of changes over the last 5 years, including Section 24 and all kinds of things that have made it tougher to make money out of being a landlord. And now they've got challenges even collecting rents and so on. What would be your advice be to the buy-to-let landlords of Britain on how this is all going to shake out?
Well, if you're still doing buy-to-let and you can make money out of it, well done. I'm not convinced that is the way forward. Sadly, I'm not convinced that this government, or indeed any government at the moment, is particularly interested in bolstering supply through creating buy-to-let. I think it's a mistake, because I think that we do need to have a vibrant, letting market. And I think it's a mistake that tax has been applied in real estate in the way that it has. I don't think stamp duty helps. I think stamp duty is a hindrance to the market. I think that the taxation on rents is also a hindrance to the market. And I also think that the inability of people to be able to put a buy-to-let into residential, portfolios or mini portfolios for savings purposes and all that sort of business. Again, I actually think we're going to have somebody who's very bold, and they need to rip up the rules. We need to change our tax system. We need to reduce the differential between corporates and individuals. The individual is asked to pay too much and the corporate gets away with too little. And in fact, you just need to have some kind of equalization, because look, I'm freelance. I don't pump everything that I earn through a company, but I could do, but I think that differential is kind of weird. But then on the other hand, if I stop working tomorrow, I don't get paid, I don't have any holiday pay, I don't have any sickness pay, and I don't have any company pension. I think, those incentives, if somebody was smart, they would rip up that rule book and they would start to sort it out, in the same way that I think we have to look at our relationship with property. And then this kind of, the older you get, and then it becomes some kind of, almost an albatross. Property shouldn't be an albatross, yet it has done. Many older people are not sorting out their property issues because they'll say, you know what, I'm going to leave that for my children or my grandchildren. They can have it, they can sort out the mess. And what we have done by the taxation rules that we've put in place is that for many families who perhaps have done well, we have created family arguments and tensions in a way that I don't think anybody envisaged. And it is pretty unpleasant, and it's nasty to deal with, that somebody's just passed away and suddenly you've got to deal with this nightmare of quite an expensive property, and then how to divide it, and then you've got all the tax issues, and it's complicated, and it's market dependent, and similarly, you've got a lot of people up and down the country who have had their confidence in the pension system rumbled because Gordon Brown started it and every other government continued it. They started to pilfer because no one noticed, because we're stupid with money, generally speaking, as a nation, and we don't know if somebody takes a little bit of tax, nobody notices. Oh, it's just a little bit. We've ended up with salami slice and complexity in a way that has been detrimental to us. And this pandemic shines a very sharp and bright light on all of the problems that we have created for ourselves in terms of older people care, stamp duty on real estate, taxation on a whole range of income measures, inability to save properly for either a rainy day or the future, and indeed people's ability to be able to make money either working for a corporation or themselves and in a fair way be taxed and not be undercut by people because of the weird sexiness, attractiveness of their Cayman Island base. The whole thing needs a radical rethink.
Absolutely, amen to that. And unfortunately, I think you're well known for writing about rich people's problems, and I think that the biggest one coming our way is probably a three-letter word starting in T and ending in ax. And indeed, freelancers, Rishi Sunak's already said that they're going to be in line for even more special treatment in the next budget. So I mean, what do you think people can best do to try and arrange their affairs in a way that will help them over this coming onslaught of higher taxes that I think must be up the Chancellor's sleeve?
Emigrate? No, I don't think that. Look, I'm quite relaxed about having to pay my tax, and I'm also quite relaxed about having to contribute to society in a way that's meaningful. And I don't see, I have not arranged my tax affairs up until now to minimize completely the tax situation that I have. If I had set up a production company and shoveled stuff through there, I am sure that I could have paid myself dividends and reduced my tax. But I actually taken the view that I don't think that's the right approach, and therefore I work as a sole trader. Of course, there are certain benefits that I receive from that. I will be furious if the government take away a few of the benefits when it comes to dealing with VAT, or it comes to dealing with things that I can offset on the basis that I do not have the ability to invest in a pension in the same way that companies do, and I don't have that thing going on. And similarly, if I'm ill and I don't earn, then there's no money coming in. So I get infuriated and cross if people think that that is something to plunder, because it isn't. If they want to level the playing field, then feel free to level the playing field, but please don't do it in a way that's actually unfair to many people who already sacrifice in other different ways. And I think we need to understand what those sacrifices are in order to make sure that the tax system is right. I also think that if anybody thinks that there's much maneuverage, if you like, for the Chancellor to move income tax rates up or anything like that, think about incentives. We are taxed so heavily in this country that there are a lot of people who just flick the bird at having to work harder. Because if you don't have an incentive for working harder and earning money, then people will not. We saw it in the 1970s. People had lovely gardens in the 1970s. Why? Because there was no incentive to earn any more money than the tax system wanted you to earn. And to me, that is daft. We also have to have an incentive program for entrepreneurs who are going to invest. Anybody who decides that they're going to, and maybe we'll learn a lesson about globalization here, anybody who thinks that we couldn't and shouldn't bring back high-end manufacture to this country should be, I don't know, have their temperature taken and their pulse taken. Because there are things that we are doing which are detrimental to our nation. And there's no reason why we shouldn't bring skills and expertise back to this country. Do I want to see mass manufacture where nobody makes any money? I don't care about that. But what I do care is that we create a lot of great things in this country, and where it's value added, whether it's a furniture item or a piece of design or things for our home or electrical goods or electronic goods, all this sort of stuff, or there are all sorts of things that historically this country was really very good at making, and high-end and artisan products and all that sort of stuff. Let's do that again and incentivize and use the tax system. Let's not use the tax system to incentivize globalization and people to use that tax system to put other people out of business. That's what we've done. And that's what we've done in our desperate, grasp, if you like, for a piece of the global pie. And wasn't it a good idea? To an extent, but we should have seen the warning signs, and the warning signs were quite simple. They were there. If you have a VAT system that allows people to sell stuff from Jersey or wherever it is under £18 and not charge VAT, funnily enough, people are going to take advantage, and they did, and their high street rot started. And it wasn't because somebody was doing something that was better. It's just that they used the tax system to take away business from people who are playing by the rules. That has to stop. And so if Rishi Sunak does anything to make that stop, great. If he does things to punish people for working hard and being entrepreneurial, that is daft.
Absolutely, and of course, one of the few benefits of COVID-19 is it's taken Brexit off the agenda. But of course, the clock is ticking on that, and I hope that the decisions being taken in the coming weeks and in the coming budgets are around building a better Brexit Britain as well as a better post-COVID Britain.
Well, maybe, but look, I think if anybody thinks that having seen the response to this pandemic, certainly a lot of people I know, there are some I'm sure who will be still disappointed that we're leaving the European Union, but the shambles in which that organisation has operated and the way in which they have treated some of their members as a result of the pandemic and what it's done to either their populations or their economies demonstrates to me why it was a good idea for us to get out. I also think that the change in nature of both technology and the shining of a light on the production methods that we have used to make our economies run, and the way that we have made some people very, very rich as a result of this. And we have relied on the goodwill and hard work of a lot of people who have not become very rich and probably should be as a result of their skills and expertise. Let's hope that there is a bit of a reappraisal. I'm a big fan of a capitalist response, and I'm a big fan for people being rewarded for doing great work and doing good things. I'm not a particular fan of people being rewarded for cheating the system or undermining others or treating others badly. And I think that we all have to take, responsibility for the fact that we have fueled a lot of change, and not all of that change has been particularly good. And we're seeing the results of, legacies from whether it's Blair or Brown or Cameron, various things come home to roost. Some of it is good, some of it is definitely not good. And if anything, we need to learn what we should be doing as a nation. And there are quite a lot of us here. There are 70 million people, and there are a lot of skills up and down this country. We need to find a way that we can harness them. We need to treat our farmers better. We need to treat our local produce better. We need to make decisions ourselves that keep the businesses and people alive and thriving that we should do, as opposed to always just going for the lowest common denominator. If we make those choices, we can make a success, and a greater success, of a post-Brexit Britain than if we decide that we just want to continue our lives as we did before.
Okay, brilliant. Now, I know in your spare time, you're also a trustee for the Royal Albert Hall. I'd imagine there's been a very significant impact on an iconic venue like that during the crisis. I mean, is it, what's the extent of the damage being done to a venue like the Albert Hall from all of this?
Well, massive. I think, as a venue that is a national charity, it's a Grade 1 listed building. And it's, I think, very often considered by many people as a national treasure. It relies on the events that take place there in order to create its revenue. It doesn't take regular government funding. So, yes, it's a charity, so it has some tax benefits. And yes, the hall took a government funded, I suppose, or a national lottery funded chunk of investment back in the late 90s. That's it. So when you have your income go from a very good position and you're creating a surplus to zero overnight, and you have to plan for a period of closure, which at the moment is uncertain, very, very difficult to manage. So far, the hall has managed on reserves. There are a number of institutions in the UK which are known as the unfunded. So it's not just the Royal Albert Hall, it's places on the South Bank and places around that do not receive regular government funding. And they will have a very difficult time of it if they are forced to close for any length of time. Are we going to have to close for a year? I don't know. Can an organisation or a venue like the Royal Albert Hall operate at 30% capacity, as some people think might have to be done for certain venues? Absolutely not. So, look, as an institution, our chief executive has been particularly good at getting hold of information and trying to drive, I suppose, the narrative, just to talk about not only us but other institutions, to say we have a problem here within our artistic institutions. In Germany, for example, I think they've put nearly 50 billion pounds into their artistic sector to make sure that it remains alive. We haven't done anything like that here. We've done a bit of furlough and we've done a bit of tax. We have not supported our artistic institutions. We need to be really careful to make sure that we protect them. And I guess the announcements over the next few weeks and months are going to be critical as to whether we have to do any long-term planning. If we do have to do long-term planning, then we need to think very carefully about how that is going to manifest itself for an institution like the Hall.
Okay, well, to finish our discussion on a slightly lighter note, James.
Yes, I made even an entertainment venue, one of the best entertainment venues in the whole world. I made even that sound sort of dark and dire.
I know, but let's just imagine that you could choose the three guests, living or dead, that you'd most like to have on your talk radio program. Who would you choose and why?
Gosh. Well, a few months ago, I would have said Tony Blackburn, but he's already now been a guest of my show and now become one of my regulars. He is fantastic. So I do like Tony Blackburn. I think I would have to go. For Piers Morgan. I think he has become the voice of a nation. You either love him or hate him. I think he's absolutely hilarious. I think his ability to be able to, stimulate conversation is, something of great interest. I would like to go for a national treasure like Joanna Lumley, because I think she's always got a story to tell. I've met her a few times. She's a hoot. She's funny. She's entertaining. I think she's got a wonderful turn of phrase, all that sort of stuff. And then I think I would have to go for one of our entrepreneurs, and I would give the offer either to Sir James Dyson or indeed Richard Branson. I don't mind which one. I'd ask them, when they're going to come home and bring all their production facilities back into the UK and all that sort of stuff. But also, I would. The reason that I want an entrepreneurial spirit like that is that. We in this country have a handful of people who have done incredible entrepreneurial things. You go to the US and you have so much choice. It's part of the endemic culture. I want to try, or would want, I think, with my show, to try and stop this British build them up and bash them down. Let's find a way in this country to celebrate success, instead of always finding a reason to take somebody down a peg or two. I think it's a bit sad that we do that. And when I write, you kind of mentioned rich people's problems. One of the things that, in fact, I consistently write about is that rich is a relative term. You ask anybody if they're rich, they'll say, no, I get by, and whatever. But to other people, they're rich. And then it becomes also poisonous to an extent if somebody is in your mind that they've got more than they need. Who's it for you to say that somebody else has more than they need? It's not. We have to move away from this very peculiar pejorative discussion about that. And I think you can only do that if you've got somebody who is super successful and talented in the mainstream. And I wouldn't want them just to come on as a special guest. I kind of want a weekly feature. because then it normalizes that person, and you realize that they're a person just like you. You know, and this is, I suppose, why, you know, I'm fascinated by it. Maybe now he's available, I should just have Prince Harry on the line, because I think he, you know, he's gone from hero to zero very quickly. It must have been an extraordinary, difficult challenge. I would not have done what he's done. I think he will probably regret the decision for the rest of his life. I think, I hope he finds the happiness he's craving. I don't think he will. And on the other hand, though, I think having the ability to be able to interview and have guests who we kind of idolize is always very interesting, because I don't know about you, but whenever I meet people who are super famous, they're just people. Some of them are nice, some of them are not. Some of them have a moral compass, some don't. Some are funny, some are actually not very funny. Some are great entertainers and very warm and, you know, great people. You know, I think we have to get back to working out what a great person is and how we can learn from them.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for entertaining us today. James Max, thanks very much for joining us.